boobity boop 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 ba da 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 boobity boop 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 ba da 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 boobity boop 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 ba da 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 da. Welcome to the Filibuster podcast. I am Susanne Koch. I'm a guest host and a lecturer and teacher educator at the University College of Oslo, specializing in online learning and digital literacy for teachers. I'm here today with Per Koch, who is editor of Forskningspolitikk, a Nordic magazine on innovation and research policy. Our guest today is Mark Brown. He is a professor of digital learning at Dublin City University and director for the National Institute of Digital Learning in Ireland. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
So, COVID-19 has challenged higher education, and digital teaching and learning is an important part of our response to this challenge. How has the National Institute of Digital Learning responded to this current crisis?
Well, that's a really interesting question because we're still so much in the crisis, and it's hard to step back and reflect on what we've done. The pace is so fast, I guess, as the crisis has taken its new twists and turns. But generally, from an educational perspective and our own unit, I think of what we've done to date in three phases. Firstly, there was just a phase of get online, get people online. And then the next phase was really get organized for people to develop alternative assessments. And the phase we're kind of in right now is get organized for planning for the next part, which is probably about fully online for the new academic year. So that's kind of the broad brush of how I would put the three phases. But within those, I think the thing I'm particularly proud of and apologetic, if you like, if I'm being a little parochial here in terms of our team in Ireland, is just how people have responded. And it takes a crisis, I guess, to see the best in people. So very early on, we developed, right at almost the beginning of March, resources on keep teaching, keep learning. We were particularly pleased that within a day of having our support for staff, we also had a resource for our learners, recognizing that the challenges were going to be more so for our learners, perhaps, than even our staff. On the 16th of March, only a day or so after Ireland went into official lockdown and our universities and schools all closed, we held a webinar, a European webinar with the European Association for Distance Teaching Universities and Eden, but we hosted that webinar to really start talking about what do you do in this situation. So we were really pleased to be able to offer something both externally, because the unit, the institute that I lead, actually serves a university which hosts it, as well as then a more national and we would like to think European and international remit. Within that same week, we were involved with FutureLearn to launch, or to plan, design and launch, all in the space of a week, a MOOC on how to teach online. And that MOOC was launched by the Thursday. So we first had the discussions on the Monday. The launch was the Thursday, and the following Monday, it was starting to be taught. Ultimately, 50,000 people participated in that MOOC. But coincidentally, we were developing our own online course within our own unit with some funding from what's known as the National Forum for Higher Education in Ireland. And that particular course, as I say, coincidentally was due to be launched on the 23rd of March. And so we had about 450 participants from day one for that, which was far more than we ever envisaged. Quite a few of our own DCU staff, Dublin City University staff, but people from all around the world. One of the things that we also hope we tried to make a contribution to was to shift the language from emergency remote teaching, from learning in isolation, to less deficit language. I don't think we were as successful as that, but we certainly championed that it was not particularly helpful to see what we were grappling with in that light, for reasons I might elaborate later. We also were very active in contributing to webinar series like the Eden webinar series that responded to the pandemic. I had colleagues that contributed, particularly around alternative assessments. I moderated one of those. In our own university, we also launched a weekly newsletter on teaching and learning, which scaffolded our staff with tips and ideas of how they might teach online in a very light touch, drawing on some of the theories like the community of inquiry framework, the equivalency equilibrium theorem, a very light touch just to give them ideas, and also ideas about how to use video in ways that perhaps in things like Zoom that weren't just simply delivering content. In the third phase that I described, getting ready for the new period, what we're doing right now is we're developing a MOOC on the FutureLearn platform called Learning How to Learn Online 101. And so that will be ready to launch for the new academic year. And that's a recognition of just how important it is to prepare our students to be online learners. In addition to that, we have a number of research studies that have already been launched. That particular MOOC and the research I'm describing is being funded by a special fund from our university. But one of the research studies that we're engaged in is on the influence or impact that emotions have played for our teachers, for those who are teaching. I think that's one of the lessons that has come through, just how important the affective side is. So that's what we would like to think is some leadership that we're taking to learn for the next phase.
Have you harvested any experiences yet from phase 1 and 2? Have you had any feedback on what you're doing that will, steer you as you take the next step?
I think one of the legacies or lessons is there's an opportunity in every crisis. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but actually we've been able to do things that we would never have been able to do previously. And so to shift from being reactive to really seeing if you can be proactive.
Do you have any examples of that?
Right now in my own university, so remember I kind of talk in two ways. I have a national and then a more of a local focus. My own university, we are not talking about emergency remote teaching. We're not talking about teaching in isolation when we come to the new academic semester, the start of the year. In fact, we've put a longer time frame on our thinking. We've done scenario planning and asked ourselves, what type of education do we want to provide in the future? And how might we be able to harness what we're doing now in order to think and offer a different kind of education? Now, that also aligned with previous thinking, to be honest, but we're actually in the process of giving this a name. So that in harnessing people to get ready to and scaffold, to use that word, for the next academic year, actually the time frame is well beyond that. And we're wanting to get people to think beyond that. And we do not want to be thinking about giving emergency remote teaching to start the new year. This is in part in our DNA now, and we want to harness it. So that's a really concrete example. I also think the MOOC that I described, that particular MOOC, we're partnering with the student body to help develop, and we're also partnering with the Irish Universities Association so that we can make more of a contribution beyond just our own institution.
Do you see that this will have a lasting impact on your university? And do you see a similar trend in Ireland? Or do you think that we will return to business as usual as quickly as we're allowed to?
I think what I'd make a really important distinction is when I was describing how we've taken opportunities, or we're endeavoring to take opportunities. So this is a mindset more than anything. I wouldn't want to sell, if you like, because we don't know what the outcomes will be. But I think that mindset shift is really important. But at the same time, it's not the crisis that's done that. So there was a momentum and an appetite for a different way of teaching and learning already. The current COVID-19 situation has given us opportunities to expand and amplify what were things already well thought through, but now with some urgency. So that's at the institutional level. I'm an optimist by nature, and George Siemens described what's going on now as the great onlining experiment, and others have borrowed that terminology. Having said that, in some of my own writings and reflections, I've been slightly less optimistic. So I think how I describe this and the role that new technologies play in innovation and change, I see it more from an ecological perspective. And it's very rare that you have this sudden change from one situation, one condition to another. And ecology is very complex. An ecology will even have backwaters where things don't change very much at all. And I think that's what we'll see. We'll see some conditions changing rapidly where institutions and people themselves will respond to that change. Others will hold on to things. The only more positive way, though, I would say, even backwaters are often breeding grounds for the next organism. So it's a complex ecology. That said, again, trying to shift the discourse, the conversation away from deficit language. For me, I'm not seeing, even though we've had tremendous moves to alternative assessments, and assessment is often the tail that wags the dog in education. Or to put another way, it's the dirty little secret of university education, because we may have digitized so much of the learning experience, but in most cases, we then ask, up until this crisis, students to go and sit in rooms with pens and paper and spend 3 hours writing, which is hardly a digital form of thinking and learning. So the crisis has given us the opportunity, particularly with assessment, to think differently. But in the discussions around assessment, both at the schooling level as well as in universities, I'm hearing very few people talk about the future of the exam, or put it another way, that the exam, the traditional print-based exam, is now dead. So to my mind, it's going to be challenging. What we'll see is that organizational culture and the subcultures within an organization are going to be crucial to the appetite for harnessing the lessons. I do hear from some of my colleagues elsewhere that there's almost a sigh, oh, if we can just get back to where we were. And that's slightly understandable because of human nature and just the pressures that we've been facing. But for me, that would be a lost opportunity. And if there's a couple of things that stand out outside of just teaching and learning, one is just the importance of digital skills. In Ireland, we have literature that suggests that almost half the population don't have the kind of digital skills to be active and contributing members of society, putting around the ability to learn. And then the reality is that the new digital society, or rephrasing it, I don't really like to talk about the digital society. We just have our societies, of which the digital now is so woven within, that the future of work and the kind of skills that people are having to learn now, learning to learn through digital technology, is the new normal for the future of learning for work. And so that's one of the legacies for me, is if we've got a generation who understand how important it is to learn how to learn online, which takes me full circle back to why our MOOC, we think, is so important to provide learners, because we can't assume they just know how to do this.
Students are, and I guess have always been, learners around the clock. You know, this is a time in their life when they're just absorbing and absorbing a lot all the time. They have competences, preferences, and sources of knowledge outside of the auditorium, outside of the curriculum even, which have helped sustain their learning through this crisis. Like, you know, YouTube and MOOCs that they find on their own or whatever. How can this be harnessed in co-learning, co-creating within courses, within universities, in order to develop the kind of skills that you just mentioned, the future skills for learning?
Great question, and it's also a very timely question, because I do need to give some credit to, at the national level, what I described earlier as our national forum, who led a national survey on the digital learning experience, or the digital experience of staff and students in higher education. And ironically, or not ironically, just by timing a coincidence, the survey was administered in October, November last year, but the results were launched only a matter of weeks ago. And that report is called the National Index Survey. Reports quite extensively about what students say about the digital experience. And they're up for more, which is one of the takeaways. They would like to see more of the digital in their experience. So that's a kind of national comment, and it's certainly a great treasure of data if anyone's interested in exploring. But at more the local institutional level, practically, the sort of thing that we're doing right now is about to employ a team of interns, DCU students, who are going to help us, along with a whole lot of new positions, to prepare for the new, not just the new academic year, but this longer term project that I'm describing. So there's a recognition, and the students told us this themselves. We work very closely with what we call our student union, or it's not ours, it's the students' union. They were incredibly supportive right throughout the first, wave, if you like, of what we were grappling with. The students were incredibly accommodating, but in some of the surveys that they did, as well as our own, the students said to us, just ask us, we can give you ideas. So the intern is a mechanism to bring someone in, and also trying to map or match those to the particular disciplines they come from, so they have some knowledge of that discipline. The MOOC that I described, our student union, is a partner in that. So actually what we're going to do in the whole course is we want it to be by students for students. Rather than being us telling learners how to learn successfully online. And so when the course is delivered, and we'll probably have several iterations of this, we will have a team of student mentors who will help facilitate the course. And then another thing that we're doing at DCU is many people be familiar with Quality Matters, which is, whilst it's the framework that came out of the United States for online courses and trying to enhance and assure their quality. The philosophy underpinning Quality Matters is about peer review, having people engage in a culture of review rather than policing of quality. So in DCU joining and really trying to put a quality mark on our course offerings, again, so we're not just making do. We want to take the best of what we can do. As part of the peer review process, students can be involved in that. So Quality Matters gives a framework. So those are just some quite practical examples. The only thing, though, I'll end on that question with a little twist is one of the things that we do know, and this also came through in our national survey, where the students said perhaps the one thing they would really like more of is recorded lectures. Well, at DCU, we're not necessarily that keen on just recording lectures. So it's not necessarily a particularly popular thing to say, but sometimes the students don't always know best. I say that with the greatest respect. And I guess my analogy is, when we go to the supermarket and we see some of those foods on the shelves that are very attractive, and, we sometimes buy them, they might not always be the best foods for us. We might need a little more education, but even with a little education, we're sometimes caught out by the marketing. So I think there's a conversation to be had in helping students understand a little bit more about how they learn as well, because we would not want to just replicate in new technologies a very traditional form of pedagogy just because we can.
Could I just widen the scope a little bit here? If you look at this not from the teaching perspective or the university perspective, but from the societal perspective, from society at large, what we are going through is a socio-technical revolution, you might say, which is partly or maybe mostly driven by digitalization. So we have a change of the way people interact and learn outside university and inside university. And Susanne mentioned the fact that we now have new types of social media and new types of interaction out there outside the university that clearly influences the way the students too experience reality and how they interact. So I had two questions for you here. The first is, do you think there's much to learn from the students and their life experience, the fact that they are digital citizens all the time, every hour of the day? Is there something to learn from them here? I mean, some of them are clearly actively engaged in online discussions. Some of them make YouTube videos. Some of them have podcasts and so on. And the second one is that looking at this new culture, so it's not only about moving the classroom online, it's about interacting with this new culture, with all that entails. How can universities help, in collaboration with students, prepare them for this kind of society and help them engaged in this kind of society in a critical and open-minded way?
Sure. So again, really challenging questions, but extremely timely questions. On the first question around how we might draw more on what the world of the student really is, and there's a body of literature known as posthumanism that sees the way in which technology and humans are just interwoven here. And in fact, that body of literature similarly talks about the post-digital, that for many people, the digital is just the norm. We are living in the digital society, so why do we need to even put digital in there? So for my mind, at a teaching and learning level, just to start with that, is I often talk about using the student as the author rather than the audience. And my comment about the mode of teaching where we feel we need to create content to deliver to the student that we're the authors and they're the audience, we can flip that, and the technologies enable them. And in fact, that can even be done in a way in which I'll call it distributed cognition or distributed intelligence, where the resources they create become part of the culture and part of the learning resources for the next cohort of learners. We don't have to shut them off. So there's a form in which we keep learning from one group of learners to another. Another aspect that we're very familiar with at DCU is that today's student, firstly, we shouldn't assume, is the school leaver, because under a focus on more increasingly lifelong learning, people are going to be learners, perhaps better to call them learners than students, and the blurring of boundaries between formal, informal, non-formal, a move towards just in time, just enough, just in case learning, and our credentials, our traditional degree programs. We're having to think now whether these are appropriate and suitable for the kind of world of learning and life that we're living. So at DCU, we're heavily involved in developing credit-bearing, stackable micro-credentials. And even the learning how to learn online MOOC that I described, the plan is for why we call that 101, learning on how to learn online 101, is because we aim to put that into a cluster of other courses to make a micro-credential. Because we think that it would be highly desirable from an employer's perspective to know that, hey, this person is very adept at knowing how to learn online, because when they come to work for us, their CPD, their professional learning, is going to be done a lot online. So that is a new normal. So I probably said enough on that first question. The second sort of one, if I remember it correctly, around sort of the cultural shifts and a bigger impact. Again, I think what we have to see is that no university or no educational institution is an island. And whilst it's very easy for us to get caught up in our own missions and our own reputations, if you like, ultimately we're here to serve society. And if there's one place that perhaps we're able to challenge society, but in a constructive way, it is university. So I think this crisis helps us have another conversation about the role that university education in particular plays in society, and then at a wider level, how we might want to design new technologies to create the types of societies we want for the future. Not only design new technologies, but design our education systems for the type of societies. So for me, inherently, this is again, I'm seeing this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to rethink perhaps some directions that we've taken in recent times. And this is fairly true of most developed countries where some of our education systems are serving economies more than societies, not to suggest the economy is divorced from society. But what is it that we want to build for the future? If that's one of the legacies of this crisis, when we get the opportunity to perhaps pause and reflect and act, for me, that would be incredibly valuable.
I think that's a nice note to end this on. Thank you very much, Mark, for interesting and inspiring conversation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and just for your listeners, if anyone would like to contact me, I'm always responsive as much as I can by email or other forms of social media. So I look forward to seeing how we can all work together. And perhaps the one thing I should have mentioned for your listeners is that they may have been expecting an Irish accent. And accents are a funny thing, but I actually originally come from New Zealand, and so we have a very New Zealand sees itself in similar ways to Scandinavian countries like Norway. So.
Dette har vært en episode av Filibuster, en podcast som utgis av fagbladet Forskningspolitikk og Forskningsinstituttet NIFU. Vertskap er Petra Andersen og Per Koch. Du finner mer om bladet og podcasten på fpol.no. Der kan du også abonnere på papirutgaven av Forskningspolitikk. Abonnementet er gratis. Kjenningsmelodien er fremført og komponert av Lene Andersen Vinje. Forskningspolitikk utgis med støtte av Norges Forskningsråd.